Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for checking us out today on this yet another live production of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Now INCON. Today's guest is a really good friend of mine, Dr. Alan Roberts. We've just been discussing and explaining the fact that Alan and I effectively both come from Merseyside, whereas I'm a Woollyback and Alan is a true scouser, in that he comes from Liverpool, whereas I come from the other side of the water, as it were. But of course, many people are probably not aware of the fact that technically, Alan, I'm more of a scouser than you are, because it used to be, didn't it, that a scouser was somebody born within the sound of the Bidston gun. And as Bidston is in Birkenhead, therefore, logically, I mean, I was born at Clatterbridge Hospital, so therefore I was probably in closer sound proximity to the Bidston gun than you were over in Liverpool. So maybe my Scouse credentials are higher than yours. And funnily enough, I posted something on Facebook recently, and there was a great deal of confusion on the term Scouse, because some of my American friends interpreted it as being aggressive or being knowledgeable or whatever. And I had to explain it's actually a corruption, I think I'm right, of lobscouse, which is a stew, and originally I think came from Denmark. I think I'm right in that.
All I know is it was a local food. I mean, my mother used to give it to us once a week. It was, it's very similar to Irish stew, but it's, yeah. And I always thought a Scouser was somebody who was born within the sound of bow legs, but
bow legs. Yeah, it could be. I don't know where bow legs is really, but it's obviously somewhere probably near Bootle, I think.
Scout is still a traditional food. I'm a vegetarian, so I've not eaten it since I was about 18, but it is still good fare to those people who still eat meat, you know. But
well, one of the things that Alan and I have in common is that I was born and brought up on the Wirral, and I moved back to the Wirral around about 15 years ago. And just a little bit of background to the Wirral is it's a fascinating place, and it actually references in a very famous prediction by a guy called Robert Nixon. Robert Nixon was the Cheshire Seer, and he lived in Delamere during the reign of Richard III. And he was known for being he wasn't the brightest character in the village, but he was known for making predictions. And one day he was in the field and he suddenly went into an altered state of consciousness, and he was dancing around the field in Delamere. And he was turning around and he was saying, "Up at him, Richard. Richard is down. We have a new king." And this was curious because the Battle of Bosworth Field was taking place at the time. But of course, in those days, communication was really bad. So nobody knew that they had a new king until Henry VII's tax collectors turned up in Cheshire and was surprised to discover that the local villagers already knew that the new king and Richard III had been killed. Mm-hmm. Now, the new king, Henry VII, was so fascinated by the stories he heard about Nixon, he requested that Nixon be brought down to London because he wanted him in the court. And what happened was that Nixon knew this was going to happen, again, because of his precognitive skills. And he said, "There'll be men that will come to see me, and they're going to take me to London, and I don't want to go to London because I'll starve to death. I'll starve to death if I go to London." And he wanted to be hidden, but they found him and they said to him, "Look, we guarantee we'll give you a chef. You'll have a cook all the time. Do not worry about it. You're not going to get starved to death. The king would like to meet you." So he goes down to London, and he became quite a nuisance in the king's castle because he was always pestering for food. So one day, the chefs got so upset with him, they locked him in a cupboard. And that was the day that the king decided to actually move location from one castle to another. They forgot Nixon, and he actually did starve to death. Okay, so it's quite a tragic story. But the link to the Wirral is quite an intriguing one, because he was asked about the end of the world, and he said that the end of the world will take place when England will be invaded by men with ice on their helmets. And he said that when the end of the world takes place, the one safest place to be will be God's holy acre twixt Mersey and Dee, which is the Wirral. And in my original version of my book, Is the Life After Death, when it was called Cheating the Ferryman, I put this quotation in And I turned around and I said, so effectively, as soon as we're invaded by Russians or people with ice on their helmets, I'm heading back home as quickly as I possibly can. So that's the Wirral background. Now, Alan and I met under interesting circumstances in that I was giving a talk at Hoylake Library on the Wirral. And I was giving my talk, and as the talk came to an end, there was always a question and answer session at the end. And there was this guy at the back of the audience who asked me the most difficult questions ever. And I remember subliminally thinking to myself, this guy is completely underwhelmed by me. I have not impressed him whatsoever. And he spoke to me afterwards, and the rest, as they say, is history, because Alan and I, it's like a lot of people I meet, there's suddenly just, it clicks. And it's as if you've known somebody all your life. And Alan and I now, whenever we meet, and this is what you'll discover in this conversation now, is we're Scousers, we can talk for England anyway. But we just spin out ideas. And Alan is such an interesting guy, and he's so knowledgeable and knows about so many things. So I was really keen to just have the kind of discussions we used to have in Bebbington Village when we used to meet in that coffee shop all those years ago. But Alan, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, a very potted history of who you are and what your background is. And then we'll just start free associating and discussing things.
Right. Well, I was born in Liverpool. Interesting in terms of what we talk about. My father was an open-minded character. He was a Christian, basically, fairly frequent churchgoer. I would say, 7 or 8 times a year. And but he was a spiritualist, and he'd read the Bhagavad Gita. He'd read many books on yoga, and I can remember as a child wanting to be a footballer, wanted to be a cowboy, wanted to be a fighter pilot, and wanting to be a yogi, wanting to actually teach yoga and to do things like meditation and stuff and learn about the Buddha, because my dad had sort of put that in, not intensely, but as a background, because he read a lot. And so I grew up with these sort of interests above and beyond everything else I did. I sort of majored in art and English when I was at school. I left school at 16 to become a GPO engineer, and then realized that I didn't really fit anything. So a friend of mine who was literally at Liverpool University, I went to a weight training club with him, and he was a nuclear physicist. He worked the cyclotron in Liverpool University. His name was Pete Butler. He was a wonderful guy. And he said, well, the number of O-levels you've got, you should go to university, or at least go to a college. So I went off to Madeley College, which was part of Keele, and I did English and art there. So I had a wonderful time just making pots, painting pictures, and going to plays and reading books. So it was great. And then I passed out of that and should have become a teacher. I actually taught art at the blind school, actually, in Liverpool, which is quite an achievement in itself. And then I went into the theatre and worked at the Everyman Playhouse, quite a bit at the Empire as well. I was basically building sets. So I became a carpenter when it got difficult for teachers, went to the theatre as a theatre carpenter, learned to do a little bit of design and stuff. All the time I was doing that, I was teaching yoga. Met a guy in Liverpool called Ken Ratcliffe, who was teaching yoga full time. You could do that if you taught every night of the week, so to speak. And he had a teacher in Manchester who was the closest thing, probably would be, the way he taught was probably similar more to Gurdjieff than to anything else. And they talked about the work, which was making yourself into a much richer and developed human being. It wasn't so much an enlightenment which was being offered, but similar to yoga, it was working on yourself to turn you into the best person you could possibly be. And to do that, he would reference art, literature, religion. And although I think Halliday was also essentially a Christian, or it came through the Christian tradition, he referenced Buddha, yoga, the Vedanta process. He would pick from everything, all and everything. And
this is Eugene Halliday, yeah?
Yeah, this is Eugene Halliday. Ken Ratcliffe, the guy from Liverpool, set up a house in set up a house in Wales, North Wales, a place called Panfadog, called Tannigarth Hall, which still runs today. And this was set up about 1970, so we're sort of concurrent with Esalen. You know, he set this up as a yoga foundation where people could come and stay for weekends, and sometimes they could stay beyond weekends. I mean, Easter used to be a 4-day retreat, and just work on ideas. I mean, in 1970, that was pretty good. And it was cheap and it was fairly basic, but the ideas were really sound. Halliday's words are still out there. I mean, my website is basically taking Eugene Halliday's ideas. Eugene was never captured on video. Well, I think there's maybe one video of him, but he used to produce tape recordings, or people used to tape record him speaking. And we've now got something like 250 of his lectures on tape, which we're trying to get in really good condition. I mean, they're out there online, eugenehalliday.org, and you'll find there's an archive there of all his thoughts and ideas. So there must be hundreds and hundreds of hours of this man talking, and they're brilliant. I mean, if you like that sort of thing, they are brilliant. And it's esoteric ideas, filtered through his imagination and his presentation, and that sort of turned me around. That picked me up from being just sort of an everyday Liverpool guy to really thinking deeply about myself and the world, and following up the ideas that we talk about all the time, Johnny. This is the sort of stuff. So I was started in that. By the time I was sort of 20, 21, I was completely immersed in this sort of stuff and these ideas, which we would now call consciousness studies. Halliday's idea was that the basis of the universe was consciousness, that was the living thing on which all the material situation develops from, and is ultimately the level of understanding that we have to get to. He called it spirit, but consciousness was the other reference it was made from, because he would distinguish consciousness from sentience. Sentience was something that you felt. Consciousness was something that you understood. You had a clear idea of what was conscious. But sentience came to you as a feeling. And so in that sense, it was more developmental, you know. So we did exercises on feeling a situation, and something comes into you as a feeling sensation before it becomes completely conscious, particularly with something like a precognitive or something that you shouldn't know, the type of thing where your intelligence is picking up something from the field, as he would say, from this pleroma of information that's around us. It will come first into your body as a feeling sensation, and then that will be refined by you until you can get it, capture it in an idea. So lots and lots of work was done, but lots of physical work. You know, we would act out situations, we would act out zodiac positions, family problems. So using physical posture and the sequence of movements and things to find and to draw down from the field intelligent ways of behaving and tuning our lives was essentially the practice that we did, and apparently still goes at Tannigarth now. I don't have a lot to do with Tannigarth. I teach there whenever they ask me, but the guys there are old Hallidayans and Ken Ratcliffe people. It's still going on.
It's one of the things that Eugene Halliday came up with that has long intrigued me is reflexive self-consciousness, which I think is incredibly clever and so prescient, as you say, about the way in which people are now looking at the universe and the way people are looking at consciousness and its interrelationship with the brain. Clearly, Eugene was way ahead of this. And I think your parallel there of saying, you know, Esalen, I don't know when Esalen started. Need to find that out because, of course, a previous guest on my consciousness hour was Professor Jeff Kripal. And I know that Jeff is heavily involved in Esalen and has suggested that at some stage of the future I might have the opportunity to speak there, which would be fascinating to do.
Yeah.
But of course, the idea is that, we've got our own place in North Wales that's doing this. And of course, I was also intrigued, your idea about movement and everything. And wasn't this what Gurdjieff was doing? Wasn't Gurdjieff was working with movements as well, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And this idea as well that it was a focused mind is capable of breaking into areas of which we know nothing of. When you focus your intention, your conscious mind, you start to accumulate and to gather force to yourself that makes you a richer human being. I mean, Gurdjieff's exercises were different in that they were more focused concentration. Often with Halliday, we take a problem and place it on a zodiac, if you like, that was painted on the floor, and work out the situation. So that people would come in as a problem, for instance, a Taurus, and they'd enter literally a hieroglyph written on the ground of the actual drawings of the zodiac, and act out situations from that, and they'd be resolved, as, if you like, using the astronomical signs as if like character assessments. The four humours and the introvert and extrovert of that humour. So a blood character or a sanguine character would be that sort of strong-willed sort of person. You look at the introvert extrovert side of that, you've got 12 signs representing them onto that particular presentation. So you can use that as a good design to analyze the character of the people you're involved with.
That is quite fascinating, and Sarah's just let us know that it was 1962 that Esalen was founded. So clearly, it was earlier. But I would imagine it was highly unlikely that anybody on Merseyside would know about Esalen in the 1960s, because it was only much later that Esalen became known worldwide, I think. But just moving on, I mean, how did you end up? Your PhD subject has long intrigued me as well, which was what, Midsummer Night's Dream, was it? I think. And what was the particular area of Midsummer Night's Dream that you focused in on?
Well, it was the archetypes that are in it. The play comes through. It's a beautifully pitched idea. If you think of William Shakespeare as being an intellectual who is living in quite a vicious autocracy. There's not a lot you can say which contradicts the church, etc., unless you go to a subject which can predate the church. So intellectual life, I would say, in England in the 16th century, 17th century, for intellectuals, you would use the classics to discuss anything which was that the church would have clamped down on. So in that play, he can talk about sex, intuition, if what we would call precognition, all those sorts of things, and spirits beyond the limited Christian viewpoint. And that's what he does. He places what is definitely an English group of players in a classical situation and plays with all the ideas that he knew that intellectuals would tune into. He even, plays around with very, very no-no sort of subjects, as he puts the Queen of Fairy in bed with a donkey in that play. And it's hilarious and it's very funny, and you will take your children to see it. But if you look at the actual themes he's talking about, they're quite deep and rich. And I wanted to look at the archetypal imagery that he uses. So in my third chapter, I sort of introduced Jung's concept of archetypes and then tried to translate them into some of the work that was going on with animals, because one or two images in animals seem to be innate. There are certain pigeons who are disturbed by the profile of a man with a gun, not just a man, but with a man with a gun. And that seems to be an image which they inherit. So there was lots of ideas going around at that time that innate ideas, archetypes, if you like, as Jung called them, are highly possible. And that, we may have inherited a great deal of imagery, as Jung would say, not as an image, but as a proclivity to an image, so that you don't have a mother image as such, because we know from chimpanzees they'll go with a furry box if it gives them milk. They'll always associate that with comfort. But there's a proclivity to want sustenance from a warm being, if you like, out of that proclivity we build up a mother image. And that's got quite fuzzy edges, and a girlfriend can easily slot into that, but not just a girlfriend, it could actually become a company, or it could be a friend, or whatever. That these images can get attached to different levels and different types of personality.
It's always fascinated me about Shakespeare, and particularly the plays that are different. And A Midsummer Night's Dream really sits out there as being incredibly curious and strange. As you say, it's dealing with a subject matter that's mythological, that is to do with the history of this country, the idea of the fairy folk and everything else as well, in an incredibly dreamlike way. Effectively, it's a dream, and it literally is a dream. And I've seen it a few times now, and every time I see more in it, and every time I see it, I am astounded at the knowledge that Shakespeare had for being a comparatively uneducated person from the provinces, who seemed to have such a wealth of knowledge from classical Greek history to history, and he knew where to source his storylines from, which was incredible. You look at the magic of the play like The Tempest. The Tempest has got so much power in it, and again, you could do an incredible Jungian analysis of what's taking place in The Tempest, and the role of the Caliban and Prospero, and the way in which they seem almost like my Damon Eidolon model, that they're contrasting each other in certain ways. So really, really intriguing. And it makes me want to go back to Shakespeare more and more. And I think as I've got older, I appreciate more his use of language. And you think, good Lord, this man was an absolute genius, just the way he uses words.
Yeah.
And because I acted in Twelfth Night way back 1969, a school production of Twelfth Night. I always wondered why on earth I was cast as Sir Andrew Aguecheek. I think that was rather a curious thing to be cast as, really. But I quite enjoyed the role. And it was great fun. Twelfth Night was great fun. And I'd also acted in, we did A Merchant of Venice as well, when I played the Fool. Yeah, I was being quite typecast there, wasn't there? I think somebody in the school was obviously trying to tell me something, I think. But moving on, so that in terms of our areas of mutual interest, I think one of the things that we always get talking about, isn't it, is about the consciousness and the true nature of reality. And I know that you've been very kind in the times that in the past you've done lectures on my work. Particularly, as I recall, you did a lecture on my book, The Labyrinth of Time, and particularly the angle of Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, Ouspensky and Dunn and everything else. And I was wondering whether we could just spin off onto that a little bit as to what intrigues you about people like Ouspensky. Well,
essentially, this idea which is buried in Midsummer Night's Dream, which is, of course, Shakespeare plays with time in Midsummer Night's Dream. It all happens over one night, although he says at the beginning there's 3 nights, to go to the wedding. So time becomes this amorphous thing once they go into the forest. So you've got this wonderful image of a city in which if you like, the conscious mind, in which it's quite a fractious area, and there's law and there's authority, etc. And then we go into this wood, and we've gone actually into, well, I would say you've gone into a wood in Stratford, because they're so English. The personages in there, the heavy-handed sort of actors and Bottom, etc., are all very English types of a village scene. And we've gone into Fairyland, because nighttime in the wood, the fairies take over, and the unconscious mind, if you like, takes over. And you've got this knot which has been tied in the city of who this girl should marry. And it's resolved in the woodland, so that even at the end, when Theseus and Hippolyta come up into the upon the two lovers, he sort of says, it's really strange the way this thing has worked out. And she says, yes, it's amazing what happens. What apparently the chaos of woodland, of nature, seems to constantly come up with answers to resolve the problems that we set in city life. I think he's talking about magic. I think he's talking about the unconscious, and how literally the moonlight aspect, rather than the sun-time, daytime clarity of consciousness, it needs this sentience, if you like, this awareness of the world surrounding that, logically formed, the illogical, if you like, aspect of art and interpretation. So I think the thing we have talked all the time is time, and how we do seem to be able to have an understanding that goes beyond just the now, precognitive, etc., and also pre-located as well. So we're actually tuning into locations other than the one we're in. I've noticed with one or two of your guests, they've spoken about their own literally precognitive and the sort of sensational images which act beyond the conscious and direct thought processes. And I had a few of those as a child. So, I mean, most of these guys that you've interpreted and yourself have had experience of a reality beyond the standard everyday, that at least points us towards feeling that what we think about time, I mean, you mentioned done, what we think about time has got so many ramifications in terms of possibilities, because people do constantly get inspired. They do seem to see the future in what they predict in terms of art, in terms of understanding where they need to be, the things, the choices that they have to make. That's one of the things I think which has come across. I've been reviewing your interviews in the Consciousness Hour with other people, and most of them have had some sort of inkling in their childhood that the world was a much broader church than the one that they received, from university, or literally from church or from school.
Because one of the things that I recall, you probably remember this yourself, that when I was living on Wirral, you were very interested in remote viewing. Mm. And as you know, I have certain reservations about remote viewing. And you said to me, let's do an experiment. And you said, okay, I'm going to draw something and I'm going to place it and seal it in an envelope. And then I'm going to try and project into your mind that image over the next 10 days or so, and see if you pick it up. And I thought, okay, fine. And I was driving along the M6 I was coming back from a business meeting. And suddenly I had a distinct flash in my mind of something going straight up and a circle on top of it. And it was quite distinct because it just jumped in my mind like a hypnagogic image. It came from nowhere. And I then got home, and I think a couple of days later, I phoned you up and I said, I think I picked up an image. And you said, okay, fine, don't tell me. I'll come round and I'll bring the envelope with me and we'll open it together to show what I drew. And you brought it round to my house, and I still found it extraordinary when we opened it, and it was spyglass. And to me, my rational mind got rather thrown there, because I was thinking, now, how is this possible? And my thought crossed my mind, well, could it be that because I was driving, I'd seen road signs and somehow a road sign, but I was on a motorway, and that was the precise thing, that had I been on an A road or somewhere with road signs around with the circles and everything else, that would have been okay, but I wasn't. I was specifically on a motorway. Yeah. And it was the way in which this image just appeared spontaneously that I thought that clearly there is some kind of communication mechanism, sort of the idea of, sort of mental radio. I can't remember who came up with the term mental radio. Can you remember who did mental radio?
Sinclair.
Upton Sinclair, or was it Sinclair? Yeah. It just kind of fascinated me, and it suddenly started to make me realize that the things you were talking about, you can't sometimes rationalize about or scientifically think about. And of course, I was then reminded of the times that we used to go to when we did that event at Stansted Mount Fitchett. You know, we did, just to explain to the audience, there is an annual event that takes place called Scientists and Spiritualists. And it involves a group of mediums getting together with a group of scientists or researchers for a long weekend at Mount Fitchett Hall near Stansted Airport. And it's a wonderful time because you really see mediums being trained and everything else as well.
Place as well. Mention the spookiness.
Oh, totally. Now, talk about spookiness. This gets more and more strange. Is that a couple of days ago, we were having a chat with Professor Imants Barus, who is a professor of psychology at one of the Canadian universities in London, Ontario, and we were talking about various themes. And I got chatting to him, and we were talking about phone calls from the dead and the idea of communication taking place whereby modern technology is used to communicate with people. You know, we're talking about like EVP and everything else, but even more interesting than that, you know, the idea like Cal Cooper, who's been on the show, has written a book with Steve Parsons, who is also a Raelian, by the way, on a book on phone calls from the dead, these kind of things. And we were chatting away, and I then I said, well, funnily enough, there was somebody I know from the Wirral who I met at that event at Stansted Mount Fitchett. Donna, do you know Donna?
Yeah.
Okay. And I mentioned, and I said, she told me an incredible story, which was in my book, one of my books, whereby her brother-in-law was killed in a really terrible road accident. He was a lorry driver, and he was coming into Liverpool on that road that comes in from Speke. And there's a roundabout with an overpass that goes over the top. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but he hit the underpass, I think it was, and he was crushed and he was killed inside the cab. And inside the cab, his phone was destroyed as well. Okay. 3 or 4 days later, after his death, Donna gets home to find a message on her answer phone. And it's from him. Yeah. And it was date stamped, and it was date stamped after he had died. And the number had been sent out on the phone that had been destroyed. Now, I mention this to Imants, and I say, you know, this is an amazing story. And Imants goes, yeah, Donna Horgan. And I went, yes, he knows her. Not only does he know her, but she's visited him in America, and they've done work together in America. And you're going, wheels within wheels here just become the people we know. The linkages are just getting so strange.
Yeah.
You know, because Donna, the reason I mention this, that Donna, when she visited me here at the house, because I interviewed her here for the book I was writing, and she brought along a recording of sounds that she'd recorded in the chapel at Stansted Mount Fitchett. Mm-hmm. And it's extraordinary. There are voices, and you can hear these whispers and everything. So clearly that place is incredibly haunted. And of course, it has all these artifacts from the periods of the great mediums, because there are those things, like those wax imprints of the hands, you know, all over the place.
Very spooky place. Well, it's probably worse if you haven't had a few, but if you're walking back down the corridors late of the night, because it's quite dark and dingy, and you've got all these plaster casts of children's hands and things, all taken from wax, as you say, in hot wax. I mean, it's really very spooky. I was talking to her at Stansted, actually, and while we were there, she would leave a tape recorder free running.
What Donna did, yeah.
Yeah, on the bed. And because the girl that was with her had questions she wanted answering. And so she assumed that it was possible for just to leave the recording there, and spirit voices would quite lightly answer the queries that she had. I never followed that up, so I don't know, but I was just intrigued by the idea that that's a simple sort of oracle, if you like. It's much easier than probably going all the way to Delphi, you know, to actually just leave a tape recorder running in a silent room.
Yeah, it is, you know, and they could have. I saw something recently about this, you know, the way in which you can pick up sounds and everything, you know, and the way in which, whether it is literally our brain picking up the sounds and putting them together in some way, is. Sarah, have you got any opinions on this? Would you like to draw you in here on this one?
I was thinking about what you were saying about Shakespeare, and I was wondering if you'd looked much into John Dee's influence on what Shakespeare was writing about, because obviously that was a big trend in the day, and I think Dee's supposed to be the inspiration for some of Shakespeare's characters as well, isn't he?
Yeah, Prospero particularly. Well, it's hard to nail any of these things down. What you'd have to say is that there's a tremendous amount of thought along the lines that we talk about here. Well, certainly, Tony, I've already just met you this afternoon, but those type of ideas were bouncing around Europe, we'd have to say, at that point, trying to, if you like, come to a head or form to some sort of a structure. I mean, the whole Rosicrucian thing was very, very close to this. And it seemed to be, because the church and necessarily the Inquisition would, in most of Europe, damp all of these things down. Like I was saying, I think people talked through classics. They knew that there were lots of things in Roman and Greek which predated the ideas of Christ and yet reflected it. So they did understand that these ideas were cosmic, that even the Christianity itself nestled on a cosmic sort of conception of enlightenment or logos. You know, as an embodiment of the logos, you can see it in the classical format. I mean, Christmas is coming, you know, the rebirth of the light. Literally in a couple, well, not too many, just 10.5 days or something, it will have the shortest day, and then the days will slowly start to come longer again. And it takes 3 or 4 days to notice it. So this is a solar event we're coming, which Christianity has assumed. And I think a lot of the intelligentsia, certainly in London and Paris, you know, and would have actually had these ideas, but in a classical mythological format to deal with and to talk about, you know.
There was a parallel of alchemy as well, whereby angels and demons were still an element of Christian ideas, but it was kind of represented in a slightly more Gothic type of way. One of the other things I thought about was what you were saying with regard to using the zodiac as a kind of archetypal map. And it reminded me of, do you know, the writer Gunter Grasse and the Tin Drum?
The tin drum.
Yeah, it reminds me of that book, because all of his characters have an astrological profile, and therefore you could start off as a literary device, come up with astrological dates of birth for like every character, and then plot out their likely actions and the kinds of things that's likely to occur in their life. And I always thought that was very clever of Gunter Grasse to do that.
I mean, it's a very good character analysis. If you've got 4 basic types, you know, the phlegmatic, the sanguine, you know, the watery, the airy, you've got all these basic types, and then you give 3 inflections of them: fixed, mutable, you know, and between, and the in-between. So you've got 12 types of personality that you can analyze, and it's not a bad format. I mean, there's a lot of ideas. It's hard to nail anything down in this sense, but certainly when you get a whole feel that these ideas are bubbling under the surface, perhaps it was just too forbidding. You know, what was happening to people who put their head above the parapet, you know, usually had it cut off, or it was or burnt at the stake. So these people were keeping it down, and yet Shakespeare goes right. He's able to say what he wants to in a cloaked form that people would understand. You know, I mean, all types went in. Looking at the globe, we had the groundlings, literally the everyday people, and a lot of his play is base humour, and therefore literally the simple people. Then we've got the merchant class, and then we've got the aristocracy. They would all come to the play. And I mean, it's an incredible media system. If you think that, you know, they could get maybe 1,000 people into the globe, that's a hell of a chunk of London's population to see concepts that you're going to play with in a 3-hour play.
Do you think he was kind of protected by being in a secret society, perhaps, as well?
It's possible. It's possible. If you look at things now, you could say that the theatre itself is its own sort of secret society. People allow them to get away with murder. We allow actors and, well, now film stars and stuff, to be almost like gods, and we allow them to bend and twist the morality of the age and get away with it. So perhaps not a secret society as we would call it, but something like that. Yeah, some sort of Freemasonry perhaps, or something which was open but also cloaked.
Yeah, it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to find out whether there was ever any contact between John Dee and Shakespeare, because Dee was out in West London, or further out than that, but effectively spent an awful lot of time, and he was regularly involved in the court because supposedly he was some kind of secret agent for Elizabeth I as well. The original 007, with his ciphers and everything else as well. And funnily enough, in my I don't know which book it was I registered. It's in my latest book, isn't it, where I have a whole section on John Dee and his creation of egregorials, the way in which he was working with Enochian magic and everything else as well. So clearly they would have probably moved in similar circles, I would have thought. But I don't actually know. Alan, you could probably confirm this.
Sorry?
Say again?
I was going to say, I'm always very suspicious when I go to the British Museum and his scrying mirrors on loan. I always think like someone's plotting something, because that happens a lot.
His scrying mirror is put out on loan by people?
British Museum have John Dee's scrying mirror, the obsidian disc, and it's often on loan. I've noticed.
What are they up to?
Exactly.
Put your name down, on the list. They'll probably phone you in about 10 years. It's your turn, sir.
Yeah, scry away happily. It's
yeah. But the thing to say against that is the fact that we allow fictitious interpretations. So there's a lot of quite seditious stuff that comes out nowadays, and quite a lot which is, shall we say, psychic or cosmic, without the authors being in part of any secret society, but they're just floating and riffing on the ideas which are current. They read all sorts of books and pamphlets, etc., as we do. They go online and they hear these stories, and they weave them into the stories that fascinate us. So they, if you like, they are vocalizing what the rest of us are thinking and chewing over. But a lot of them are literally worked, if you like, by the ideas rather than actually representing them or holding them or manipulating them. The ideas seem to pick these people up and run with them.
I always found it quite intriguing the way in which, in terms of the Tempest, the way Shakespeare chose Bermuda to be the location of Prospero's Island, and effectively that must have been only comparatively recently discovered. And I don't know if you've ever been to Bermuda, but it's a very curious place anyway. I was there about 25 years ago, and it's got a very strange feel to it. And you can. It has this terrible feeling of isolation, and it's so it's very very narrow, long and thin, and it's beautiful beaches. It was the first time I'd ever seen Portuguese man-of-wars. There were a load of Portuguese man-of-wars all along the beaches. But of course, it's quite comparatively far north. So it's, it's not in the Caribbean or anything. It's got its own unique feel to it. And you see the policemen and everything. It's like going back to the 1950s. But a lovely place and well worth going to. So, Alan, one of the areas, again, there's so many areas of overlap in terms of our interest, really. And I was wondering, where would you like to take the conversation now in terms of what are the things that you'd like to pick up with me?
Well, one of the things that gets me, I mean, it's you talk about the Eidolon and the Damon, yeah. And I always see them, not that I disagree with you, But to hold that in context, I see that as being the unconscious and the conscious element being watched by the conscious element, if you like, the self itself constantly choosing between which of these paths it's going to go on. And that if we see that, then we've got a whole history, literally, of, including the split blame thing, which, is really very much current, to encapsulate these stories. And then we see it written into lots and lots of stories. You've got there in Midsummer Night's Dream, you've got the two characters representing the two sides of life. In a lot of mythology, it's there. So this idea, I don't like to nail an idea down. I like to keep them open, because every time we close down and say, oh, this is it, this is the way it is, we exclude something which hasn't come in yet, and we're going to have to rethink it anyway, particularly if, like you and me, we're constantly bringing in new information from outside. These things sort of, there's no need to foreclose, if you like, or to grasp this situation. We can always keep it very loose. And it's in that, I think, that we keep building this up. It's like a constant meditation upon what this field of whatever is that we call life. And we're gathering information all the time. And I think we do so in sleep. I think we do it, from our friends, that we pick up these things for constantly. I mean, I've lost two fairly close friends in the past few weeks. And it's surprising, really, how that has demanded a certain amount of time just to go back and mull over what they meant to me. The things we used to discuss, one of them was not very esoteric at all, but was deeply literal. So if I wanted to discuss ideas, I'd have to use a book or a play or a film, and I'd have to stay there and not ever mention that it was anything other than fiction.
That's
these are ideas
we're
playing about, and of course they're not real, but we can do these ideas. And I think, a lot of our society is like that. They can toy with these ideas as long as we keep saying, this is not real, this is not really happening. Now, when you and I step out of it and say, well, actually, yes, it is happening. It's happening all the time. And, it makes life a hell of a lot richer if you allow that. More and more people are coming in onto this. I mean, even in the time we've known each other, it's exponential now, isn't it? The number of people are discussing these ideas. But for a lot of people, it's still just ideas. I mean, particularly this time of year, the amount of television which has got myths folded into it that we're watching every day, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's as if these ideas, that they're always there. They're part of the zeitgeist. They're part of the Weltgeist. But I think your point, though, was an excellent one, that people will only accept them if you put them within a fictional context. As soon as you start to describe them as actualities, they get disturbed, they get worried. And what I think is happening, and I think Sarah would agree with this as well, that what we're finding is that our group of friends and associates, we're all being drawn together by some kind of attractive force that's bringing us together to work together on these things. And funnily enough, Immense Baruch, again, when I was talking to him a couple of days ago, he came out of the blue and he just turned around and he said, and he's a real esotericist. I didn't realize that his background, I mean, he started literally as a magician. He heavily involved in really freaky stuff. And it was only then that he then decided to do his degree in maths because he wanted the rigidity. And he was saying, he said, we're being drawn together for a reason. We are having this conversation now for a reason. There's no chance involved here. We're all going to contribute moving forward. Now, again, in his latest book, Transcendent Mind.
Yeah.
He brings up something that was very
expensive one, I've noticed.
It is extremely expensive. Yeah, I think it's about £35 at the moment, which is a lot of money. Now, again, the way the world...
Add 20 to that. 50.
Okay. Well, this is how our world is working here. And this is how there are wheels within wheels going on. Mm-hmm. Because yesterday, I had a phone call from a previous guest on this show, Richard Grossinger. Okay,
Yep.
our last guest, which Sarah now knows. Richard rings me because while he's jogging, he's listening to my first book, and he was so excited about some of the themes in that book that he'd never realised before. And he's going, "My God, this is an unbelievable book! How did I not know about it?" But that wasn't the point that we got talking, because we got chatting about various things, and there was something he said, and I turned around and I said, "This sounds very much like the work of Imants Baruch." No, it was the other way around. That's right. When I was talking to Imants, I mentioned Richard Grossinger, and Imants goes, "Yes, I know him. Yeah, I've been in contact with him recently." And when I mentioned it to Richard Grossinger, Richard said, "Not sure." He said, "The name rings a bell." And then we finished our conversation, and within 10 minutes, he'd emailed me back and said, "You're not going to believe this. He sent me his latest book for review for publication by Inner Traditions." And I'm thinking how strange this is, because Imants wants me to read that book as well. And he's going to be sending me from a different point of view. So here we have Richard Grossinger. Richard Grossinger is also a really good friend of Jeff Kripal.
Yeah.
They go back years. And you're going, and as a man said, he said, it's like a huge Venn diagram, and we're all working together. We all don't have the answers, but collectively we're going to find them. And in his book, he mentions something called Hempel's dilemma. And Hempel's dilemma is an incredibly powerful concept. It's the idea that we believe that our science now understands everything. But every society has always done that. Every society has always believed that our science has got the answers. And as they say in Transcendent Mind, that's ridiculous. Because why do we believe that we happen to live at the point where we understand everything? We're not even, we're just down from the trees. How can our understanding, and indeed, could there be an argument to say that we can never understand the world as it works within our universe, because we're within it. It's outside of us and therefore beyond it. So sometimes it's almost, we try to understand, but we need to go with the flow in some way. And I think this is, as I'm getting older, my desperation to understand everything. I mean, I've got a pile of books I'm plowing through obscure areas of quantum physics at the moment, because I really want to understand a particular area I'm particularly interested in. And you think, but there's so much information. How can you ever know everything? But there's this great need, isn't there?
I think that's, again, as with science, people have always been like that. And John Dee, William Shakespeare, they were in the same state. I mean, I don't tend to think that enlightenment is anything other than that you realize you get to a point where you can self-educate, you can understand to an enough degree that you know where you need to look, and you know how you need to work on yourself, and you develop yourself. I mean, we've talked about the long body many times. The future you is pulling you, and you're also, you're pulling the childhood you, carrying you with you. You've got a line of development through this world, and you can sit in that. You can actually feel into that and feel what's the next thing for you to do. Understanding you'll never feel completely full, but you feel that you're on the right track all the time and you're actually going forward. I mean, there are so many people who are vastly more intelligent than us, certainly more than me. I can't talk for you guys, certainly not Sarah, because I've only just met her. But there are so many people, you've met them and you think to yourself, wow, God, I wish I could think like that. But then, you can do something else. You can paint or fix bikes, or for God's sake, you can do something that they can. And in that, you get a great deal of a buzz from that. They've never even explored that. They've never even been down that avenue, So, I mean, I think that is the human condition. And as we are at a certain particular point, we're reaching that nodal point where we can say, yes, okay, I know where I need to look. And isn't it joyous just to be the way we are?
I mean, this is the wonderful thing. I was talking to the lady that runs Victoria Givauen, who is the lady that owns Contact in the Desert. And I think it was her. I talk to so many people these days. I think it was her I was talking to. Or was it somebody else? I can't remember now. But I sometimes feel like going with the flow. I sometimes feel I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and I just want to fly, because the ideas are so bouncing out, and the things that so excite me. I will read something and I'm desperately trying to link it to other things because I desperately don't want to forget. Because as you get older, your brain is not quite as good at remembering things as it's been in the past. And I desperately need to make the links. And then recently last night, particularly I had a sleepless night last night. And and it intrigues me this. I was having a lot of hypnagogic images, an awful lot of hypnagogic images were playing around in my mind. And I kept hearing the voice that talks to me in my sleep that I'd never really noticed before. There's this inner dialogue that's verbalizing and talking to me. And it's talking to me. And it's the same when you see a hypnagogic image. It's almost like it's in your periphery vision, but if you look straight at it, it will disappear. Yep. So you have to almost allow it to creep up on you. And it's the same with the voice, because if you pay attention to it, it fades. And then I came to the conclusion that could it be that when you're in the hypnagogic state, when you're in kind of REM intrusion, you're in the liminal areas between sleep and waking, this is when the other you can come through and talk to you. But then the question is, which part of you is doing it? Is this an eidolonic dialogue? Is it the me inside the simulation that doesn't know the past and the future? Or is it my daemon? And sometimes I get quite confused, because sometimes I think the right approach is to do this. But then there's this little voice that says, no, don't do it. And I think, is the little voice my daemon because my daemon knows the implications? Or is it the driven part of me that wants to do it that is my daemon? That's the problem, isn't it? We don't know which voice is which.
Why not just hold them both? Or hold what you've been given and ask for better help? I mean, when we were talking about, I don't know how much longer we've got.
No, we've got as long as we like, Alan.
Oh, okay. One of the first things that really shook me, as a child, I'd had a dream which recurred every 6 weeks or so. And it was quite standard need for me to get it. And I would wake up covered in sweat and sort of breathless. And I would hear a train, and I'd get a vision of where I lived in Lark Lane in Liverpool, and it would be going from a negative photograph into an ordinary photograph, and then into a negative and into an ordinary, and that was getting faster and faster and faster and faster, and I would be getting more and more panic stricken, and then it would just go blank, and I'd wake up, walk around, go to the toilet, make a cup of tea or something, come back to bed, go to sleep. And that had plagued me from about 7 onwards, and it was still happening when I was about 14 or 15. And I'd not really talked about it. I told my mum and dad about it. They just said, oh, it's just a recurring dream. It's not a problem. And I was sitting in the company of my aunts and uncles, and I mentioned it. I was talking about it to my cousin, and she turned around and said to her mother, you know, Alan's got a really funny dream. And I recounted it again. And she said, that'll be when you were 4 years old. The children in the street had tied you to a lamppost with the rope around your throat. And they were pulling it tight. And they were trying to get it off, but they were pulling it tighter because it would twist it around your throat. And your uncle's friend, they were both engine drivers in the railway. Your uncle's friend came down the street, and with a penknife, he just cut the rope. And you had passed out, and they carried you into the house, and your mother brought you round. Now, she didn't know anything about it. She just knew that you were choking, and this chap, Billy Weston, had cut the rope on you. So she said, that's probably that dream. And I said, well, that's amazing. I've never had the dream since. It just went.
Wow.
And from that day to this, yes, I always carry a penknife.
That's why you carry the penknife. Oh, I'd always wondered. I thought maybe you were a crypto killer or something, and it was there just in case you had the urge to kill, you know.
Or some sort of Sikhism thing. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're a Liverpool Sikh. It's your dagger.
I've never had a dream since. I can visit it because it was so. my aunt, who in no way was psychic or anything like that, just dispersed it for me like that.
Well, this shows, doesn't it? I mean, there was a lady called Esther Salaman who was a Russian psychologist, I think she was, and she wrote an amazing book that was profoundly influential on me many, many years ago. And I think it's called A Collection of Moments, I think. Mm-hmm. And it deals with charged memories. And charged memories, again, in the original version of Cheating the Fairy, in the original version of my first book, it never got into the final part because I ran out of space and my editor wanted it taken out. Mm-hmm. But I was really intrigued by those memories we have in our childhood that are just so imbued. You remember them now. You can feel the smell. They're very tactile. They're very, very powerful, but they are never about the time that somebody came in and said, oh, your grandfather's died. Yeah. They're normally very mundane moments, you know, and this is what she argues, that there seems to be these, and I've argued that could this be the recording mechanism by which we record our lives? And there are certain parts of it that are super saturated. It's almost like the old tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, you know, and imagine a super saturated bit where it's more intense and it's just random why it's more intense. And of course, from this, I'm reminded the Philip K. Dick short story, what's it called? The guy that discovers, he opens up his own brain and he finds a tape recorder in it and he starts pulling the tape recorder. And as he pulls it, his time keeps moving. And he realizes this is the tape recording of his life inside his head. There's something rat, I think.
I've not read that one.
Oh, it's extraordinary. But, you know, could it be that that's what these are? Now, I think there was a poet, somebody who was a blind poet, and she mentioned how she remembered just touching the fur on her collar and how that was imbued. But these things then become sublimated. Yeah. And we weave them in, don't we? We weave them into the narrative of our lives and create a backstory, which wasn't the original meaning. Yeah. In some way. But it shows how complex we are, doesn't it?
I would sort of say, when you say those sort of saturated moments, I think one of the things we do, I mean, I've done quite a bit of meditation, including Zen meditation, which I think is particularly valuable for this, is when you do nothing and you give yourself time, it's as if you're creating a saturated moment where you can start to just consolidate what you've been doing maybe for the past 2 or 3 months, and you haven't given yourself time just to absorb it. You know, so it's, you know, it's superficially, but it hasn't densely gone into your substance. And I think in many senses, it is those moments some people go fishing or whatever, you know, you just need calm and quiet to allow these things to resonate with you. Or perhaps sometimes a play or a poem will, you know, reactorize it for you, and it comes back and you suddenly see something which has happened to you in a completely new light. And then I think, you know, these quiet downtimes are very, very important for development. You know, it's not just eat. You have to digest and you have to consolidate these things.
Well, it is, isn't it? It's taking that quiet moment, you know, that living in, you know, as Eckhart Tolle says, you know, the idea of living in the now.
Yeah.
And realizing that everything is just a collection, as Salaman says, it's just a collection of moments. That's what our life is. It's a collection of moments. And again, you know, when you made the notification of the Linga Surya, the long body, you know, the idea as Alan in the second act of Time and the Conways says, you know, maybe we are all our lives. Maybe we are part of everything, and it's just from the moment of our death, and we're just slices. And this is just a slice of the real you and the real me. And of course, then he goes on and says, we have a wonderful future going forward. And of course, he then references, doesn't it, in a nice turn, he's actually referencing an experiment with time by J.W. Dunn. And that's the whole point. Because he says, doesn't he, he turns around and he says, there's a book I'd like to loan you, and I will lend it to you. And again, if anybody out there, if you've ever seen or take the opportunity, watch or listen to Time and the Conways. It is one of the cleverest plays ever. And again, I write about it in my book, Time in the Rose Garden, because it's such a clever play.
Don't forget John Snover Jordan as well.
Oh, wow, yeah. John Snover Jordan.
We had a long chew over that. And I mean, he's doing the Tibetan Book of the Dead there.
He is. You know, just again as an explanation, Johnson over Jordan, the opening sequence, because Johnson over Jordan was such a difficult play to do. Benjamin Britten did the music. and it was such a large cast. But the opening sequence, and I think it's only been performed about 15 times. And I think the last time Manchester Grammar School did it, because remember when we did that talk at Manchester Literary Festival, and the guy that did that, he put it on his school, and he tried to do it on his school there.
But the Eugene Halliday Society did it. We did it, an amateur thing. We all just sat around and read it, and that was about 4 years ago. Yeah,
really. And
we all took about 3 or 4 parts, but it was wonderful to do. It was wonderful. Everybody was just really enjoyed it. There were about 16 of us in a room. One person didn't take a part. Really just wanted to watch, and everybody else took 2 or 3 parts, and it went really well. Well,
it's the thing, isn't it? Because it's a near-death experience. Effectively in the opening sequence, the funeral is taking place, and he's on stage and he's wandering around, and nobody's reacting to him. It's almost like the film Ghost. Nobody can see him, and he's in the bardo. Of course, that's what happens, doesn't he? He then's going back on his own in his own past.
Yeah,
he witnesses instances in his own past.
Think of the Robin Williams film. What Dreams May Come.
What Dreams May Come, yeah.
I mean, that has the whole sequence there of him sort of, I think, at the funeral, and then post-funeral, doesn't it? That takes him right down into the next life.
Well, funnily enough, I'm doing a section on my new book where I'll be reviewing the Swedenborgian aspects of the movie Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, right.
And the way in which Jacob's Ladder it's very Atlantean. It's very similar in terms to my own ideas of what happens, because it's all a death sequence. He's dying as he's being medevaced out. He's in Vietnam. He's living his future life and his past life. And again, he's in a bardo state, isn't he? He's in this kind of state where some of the most weird sequences in that movie, aren't they? Where you have that kind of switching heads.
Very psychedelic. I thought it was basically because we were at that time. There was a lot of talk that the psychedelics were getting into Vietnam, and actually deliberately given to the frontline forces or just experimentation by the squaddies themselves. But why do we need to go there? I mean, I've just written a thing out for It's a Wonderful Life. As one of the guys I quote in the thing is, if you cut the last 20 minutes off that, you've got hell on legs. The downward descent he goes into when he died, before the moment he gets rescued by the angel. The act up until then, it's just a tremendous critique of American society. It's just really the pits, and yet children love it. We all love it. I mean, it's a fantastic film to watch again.
Oh, totally. Again, another movie. I mean, we'll be talking about movies with our next guest, but we're talking about older movies. The sequence of A Matter of Life and Death.
Yes.
The Pressburger and Emmerich movie.
Yep.
And how wonderful that is, where Niven is trying to convince the gods that Britain needs to survive in some way. Yep. It's very pertinent for what's happening these days in many ways. But of course, in that film, they have this incredible sequence where they freeze frame. They're playing the table tennis, and they freeze frame. Yeah. And that was an extraordinary thing to be doing in 1942, 43, And it was originally going to be called Stairway to Heaven. Do you know that big stairway? The original title was going to be Stairway to Heaven.
And the stairway is an incredible symbol, and you've got all these historical characters, and you've also got the people joining who are dying in the Battle of Britain. I mean, it's a fantastic concept.
Yeah, again, it's when you look at the way these tropes are there. I've long argued that my cheating the ferryman hypothesis, it's not mine. It doesn't belong to me. It's there. It's out there. Yep. Everybody subliminally knows it. And the reason that people respond to my work is when they fully understand it and they get away from the Nietzschean idea. Because so many people say to me, I don't want to live my life over and over again. And I say, you don't. That's Nietzsche. It's Nietzsche's argument that the eternal recurrence, the eternal return, you live your same life over and over again. But even as Nietzsche said, the subtlety of his model is that if you know that you are going to live this same moment over and over again, you're going to make sure you get it right now, because you want to get it right. Because if you're going to do it for all eternity, you have to make it perfect. Yeah. And that it releases him. He says that, doesn't he? When the goblin speaks to Nietzsche and also Sprague Zarathustra, I think it is, isn't it? Or as the gay science. And the goblin says, this is a terrible thing. And then he says, no, you've given me the greatest, you've released me from all this. Yeah. But, you have novels like Replay. One of the greatest novels of the 20th century was Replay by Ken Grimwood, which is Itlad writ large. It's got similar sequences to the Time Traveler's Wife.
Yeah.
And it's similar. And one of my contacts, I'm in contact with the author of The Time Traveler's Wife, Audrey Niffiger. And again, we have the same themes, don't we? Going back. And of course, then we come full circle and we come to Ouspensky and The Strange Life of Ivan the Sokin.
Yep. And Ouspensky, I was just going to say, before you mentioned the fact that Nietzsche actually comes to that very same sort of conclusion, that this actually sets you free. You've got Ouspensky, and I would say also Gurdjieff, hinting very, very strongly that if you concentrate the mind, you're able to break out of those traps that we constantly find ourselves in, both emotionally, intellectually, but also in terms of time. That we are such things as dreams are made of. We made on, actually, which is even a better way of saying it. And, it's these themes keep on coming up and being re-energized in different forms. But yeah,
because they're almost like archetypes, aren't they? They're almost just things that it just feels right. And it well, for me, if the argument is that in some ways this is my own Phaneron, and this is me manipulating my world to fulfill my anticipations and hopes and dreams, everything will vindicate this. And one of the things I'm working with now is extending the egregore hypothesis to say that, we create an egregorial world from our anticipations, which of course is in magic. The idea, isn't it? You create the thought forms and bring them about, in one way or another. Sarah, are you interested in coming in at any time? Is anything, again, as our...
I was just enjoying your conversation, but I have written some stuff down because one of the things you were saying earlier was about how every culture and every civilization has thought they have all the answers, or that their science is what they believe to be the sort of mass of knowledge. But I do think there's a case for perhaps there being more of an appreciation of the mysterious and the unknown in ancient cultures, like even as recent as something like sailors going sailing on boats and not knowing what shores they're going to wash up on and seeing animals they've never seen before. I'm always really fascinated by the paintings that sailors did of animals when they saw an elephant for the first time and things like that. And, the legend of the Kraken and thinking they may discover a sea beast. I think we are in an especially unusual time whereby we really do think we know everything and nothing comes as a surprise anymore. I've been quite amazed by people's supposed shock at the monoliths appearing around the world, because it seems like not that big a deal, really. I don't get that. I think it's just a sort of internet meme kind of thing. And the other thing I was going to say was about and maybe
by the way our mutual friend Phil gets quite annoyed about this when he says they're not monoliths. That means single stone.
Made up stone. I've read that as well. The other thing, I also guess with the mystery, there's an element of naivety, and I think about stuff like the mystery schools where you'd have to go through a mystery initiation to experience your own death, or be so shocked or so amazed by something occurring that it would sort of transform your consciousness. And I just wonder whether that's really possible for a lot of people, short of a real near-death experience these days, whether that people are like that awestruck or that amazed or that blown away by anything these days. The other thing was, I totally agree what you've both said about the idea of fiction and fiction being used to transmit information in potentially the most effective way, because I think it engages feeling and empathy, and you relate to characters, or you put yourself in the place of the characters, and therefore you have a feeling response to something, and in a way that creates a deeper engagement with the information. The other thing I was interested about is what you said about meditation, and I think meditation and the hypnagogic state are both ways of accessing a non-linear perspective or appreciation of reality. And I totally get what you're saying about your hypnagogic experiences, Anthony. And I think that that's very true, that once you start focusing in on stuff, it stops. And I think that is because, you know, like when people take psychedelics, their sort of central control area of their brain relaxes. And so they actually have more of a full brain perception of reality. I think something similar happens when you enter dreaming. Your brain kind of is much more open to perceiving things in different ways, and there's potential scope for something like synesthesia. And something you also said about dreaming made me think about our future guest, Rebecca Sharrock, who has highly superior autobiographical memory, and something she said in a recent interview where she was talking about her memory of dreams. And because she has this incredible memory ability, she was talking about childhood dreams and believing that every night she thought she was actually taken away from her family home because she couldn't disassociate between her dreaming experiences and her waking experiences. And I think that that's an extraordinary idea to think about if you regard like how a child would perceive those kinds of events. And also, Alan, I've had those experiences of like once you've worked out or you unpicked the secret from a dream, worked out what it meant, you stop having them. I've had it with a really good dream though, so I'm quite gutted because it was not a nightmare.
The only thing I would say to that, sir, is you mentioned the brain. When you take psychedelics and the brain sort of relaxes apart in another brain. To me, it just seems as if you were talking about a mind here rather than a brain. That's the only. It's just the word. I think we need. I think as a society we need to come to terms with this. But mind stuff and brain stuff don't quite integrate. And where the line is, I don't exactly know. But that felt like one where I would step into the mind or back into the brain, so to speak. And but yeah, that's a good analysis of what we've covered, I think.
No, absolutely. So, Alan, I think Sarah's comment, I think about, and it's something I've always wanted to talk to you about, is when when you go into meditative states. I mean, we've never really discussed this. You're as a meditation trainer and everything else as well, as to what have you discovered? What have you found over the many years you've been doing this? What are the revelations? Not
great revelations. One of the things which is a stage, if you like, and I don't consider it to be a particularly highfalutin stage, is a thing that they sometimes call the gateless gate, which is when you just stop thinking and you realize that you're still there, and you're not there in any limited sense. You feel more there than you were getting into that state, and that just seems to be rich in itself. Sometimes things resolve. The other word which I'd like to leave you with is that sentiency thing, because often it won't be a clear idea. It'll be a feeling which feels almost like a bodily thing, but your body relaxes and you just become more part of everything. And it's okay. And you don't need to sort it, because at a sort of cellular level or at a soul level, it's sorted, and yet the details are still having to be worked out. So that's what meditation gives. And it also connects with the rest of your life. I mean, Julia Mossbridge in her premonition code, which is over there somewhere, talks about this getting in touch with the previous you and the future you. And that's a good way of describing how it feels. Not with any clear images or anything, but just by a sensation that it's okay and that it feels right and that you're on a path and you're making progress and it's good.
Funnily enough, there's a reference there again, if anybody's interested. If you go on to my YouTube channel, there's an interview there I did with Julia Mossbridge. And of course, Julia Mossbridge is the co-author with Emance Baruch of Transcendent Mind. So they work together on this. And again, I would say that her work is very, very intriguing. I'm also, as Sarah says as well, it's really great to get Rebecca to be joining us as well, because I'm hoping that we might be able to link up with one or two other interesting people in terms of superior autobiographical memory. For instance, one of my previous guests was Dr. Daryl Trefford, and Daryl was the technical advisor for the movie Rain Man. and he was the guy that worked directly with Kim Peek. And during the interview, he explained to me some extraordinary things that took place in Kim Peek's life. And clearly, I think when we have these, when our consciousness seems to move slightly or moves away from the general intellect that seems to trap us sometimes, there's almost this intuitive knowing. Yeah. That sometimes you just know it's right. And it's an instinctive feeling. Yes.
That's why Eugene would say use the word sentiency, because it just means feeling it, and we get sentiment from that word. It's something which is not crystallized yet, but it's on its way to being crystallized. And yes, you can go after it. You can pull it in. I mean, there's lots of people suggest that a lot of the the poets do this. They try and capture in words a fleeting sensation, something which is meaningful, but they can't get the meaning into the nitty gritty, if you like. And a lot of them, like Kubla Khan, is all about that. The whole sort of the inspiration bursting out and not being able to be contained in time. So this whole literary. I mean, I come at these things from a more literature basis than from science, because I actually think that art, as we know it, is trying to get at this numinous level constantly, which is eating away at people, and they've got to try and paint it or write it or dance it or whatever, carve it if they possibly can. It was interesting seeing Myron Dial actually, and the stuff he was producing. You can do an art class and just allow people to do free drawing, and it's amazing some of the imagery that comes through, from people who are holding the crayon wrongly, these images that come out, and his stuff was very, very resonant with that.
I think his art is extraordinary, and there was something he posted on Facebook a couple of days ago, which was a painting he did a few years ago, and I think it's one of his best works. It's absolutely extraordinary in its colour and its vibrancy, because one of the things that I find these days is that I have this kind of desperation almost to get things done in some way, and I have this great fear that it's not going to click in some way. And it happens to me every time when I start writing a book. I always have this incredible feeling of insecurity. It's profound, and I worry, and I think, where is this book going to come from? Why am I going off on this tangent? I'm being dragged away. I've only got so many days to write this book. And every time it all falls into place. And it just happens, and you get, and suddenly you realize why you've been going off on that tangent, because there was a reason, but you didn't know why you'd gone off on that tangent until you get there. And it's as a gift again, that there's a kind of precognition taking place, whereby
there absolutely is precognition. That's the threshold sensation of not knowing,
because I'm reminded here, I used the analogy many years ago of my first book, and I felt that I was like Frederick Schliemann at Troy. I wasn't writing a book, I was excavating it. I was digging into my own subconscious to create this book. Now, if there is an argument that I've lived this life many times before, I've written these books many, many times before, or I've refined them over a period of time. And again, I'm thinking here of, some of the works of Borges is particularly somebody that resonates with me, particularly these days, in terms of his writings. And I'm seeing more and more in that. But I'm seeing more and more, because one of the most interesting things we're going to be doing, I've agreed with my friend Laura Stuckey in America. And on the 11th of January, we're going to be doing this with her. And the plan there is we're going to be discussing basically John Fowles' book, The Magus.
Yes.
And the symbolism within the Magus, because that's a book that has carried me through my life. I first read it when I was in my mid-20s. And I sometimes think there's meaning in there that I can't see. That there's something there that I'm missing, but there's something missing in all our lives. There's this search for something, but we don't quite know what it is. You know, is it in Blade Runner, the movie? Where no, it's The Matrix, isn't it? Where Morpheus turns around and says, "There's something in your brain that you can't quite scratch." That you know it's there. And I just always feel that the universe isn't complex. The universe shouldn't be complex. It should be simple. Occam's razor and everything else tells us that simplicity is the answer. So at the moment, I always think, you know, we've got 16 subatomic particles that make up the universe. We've got different fields. It doesn't really make any sense. There must be a simpler version,
right,
going deeper down. And it's the same with ourselves, you know, that we have the answers. We just need to go to that quiet place. You know, that wonderful feeling. I was reading Morris' book, you know, and he says about, you know, the kind of the feeling you have of the greater consciousness that you appear when you go quiet, you know. And I think these are the ways forward, and we need to do that. And I think writers like myself, we need people like you to teach us meditation, maybe, to stop that desperation. Because I'm hellish at the moment with everybody. I mean, I must be a nightmare to live with at the moment. Whenever I'm writing a book, I'm just, I really become the typical creative madman. I'll throw things around. I'll scream. I'll shout.
Maybe it isn't like that.
Come on, Anthony. She can tell us what you really like.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, get Penny on. She'll tell us what you really like.
In most uncertain terms, that's exactly what she will do. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's trying to deal with it at the moment.
But if you are alongside sometimes these people who are very, very advanced, if you like, they still get ratty and they still get nervous, and they still, because it's a threshold feeling that you're going into a new situation, and it's nebulous and it's not constant, not concrete, and that opening up is part of the process of going into a new area. And I think life will constantly be doing that for you. And I think, you know, if you lost that, you'd lose a tremendously important aspect of being human.
Sarah, what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely think you should get into meditation, Anthony.
Or I need a Lucia device or something, you know, I need something to...
I mean, I guess that's the thing, though, with meditation. Like, I learned Vipassana, and previous to that, I was meditating, but there were always like little accoutrements to it, like music or incense or some sort of distraction. And I'd actually done TM meditation before that, so I had a mantra. And I found Vipassana so extremely hard to do because there's no mantra, there's no accoutrements, there's no like background, there's no sense, there's not really any sense of ritual, although I guess after a while it does become a ritual in itself. But having had the TM mantra before, it was so hard to let go and to just open up to essentially nothingness. But once I did, I mean, I've read books about the idea of neuroplasticity and how it takes basically maybe 3 weeks for that activity of meditation to start to activate. But I think it's probably got more to do with time, because when you go for a 10-day silent retreat, you're meditating for 8 hours a day. So after 10 days, you have physical sensations that alert you to the fact that you're definitely doing something a bit different. But yeah, I think it's amazing. It does enable you to, one of the things that I liked about it was that it made me take responsibility for myself. And I went with all sorts of like annoyances with people and stuff like that. And when I came out of it, I was like, you know, I recognized that one of the things Goenka of Vipassana says is that like hating someone is basically just poisoning yourself. And you really get to the real source and the essence of that idea of basically like committing any sort of crime, any kind of emotional bad feeling is just punishing yourself, which you don't want to do and is never going to hurt anybody else either. So yeah, it's great. And you also, like, I think because I had the TM meditation mantra, I found it physically really hard to sit cross-legged, and I would be in like really bad pain for the first 3 days. And then all of a sudden I started to get this appreciation of your physical body being like finer or denser vibrations, and that actually you can change the way that your body feels just through concentrating on it existing in that way.
It's interesting, Alan, because I remember once you said something similar about having to stay in the same position for a long time and how difficult that is.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very simple. You think, and it becomes a tremendous hurdle. You know, the fact that you're just sitting still. I tend to sit kneeling on a little sort of platform now, but I used to sit in the full lotus position, and yeah. It's just one of those stages. Eventually it just dissolves, and it actually feels as if your legs have just dissolved. You know, there's no pain, and they've gone. And then you have a problem. You know, they don't really want to do anything else. Then the walking is a problem, and all sorts of things. So you have to do it consciously, and you become this really strange automaton that is having a lot of fun just being an ordinary person again, coming back into reality. It's fascinating. It is fascinating. I mean, it's one of the ways of exploring yourself, and it's a very rich way. And it's so simple, really. So
I think that was one of my feelings, actually, when I came out of Vipassana. I was like, oh, it's all boring. It's just so simple. It's almost like a massive disappointment. The life is that simple and boring. And it took me a while back to get into doing jokes and like just enjoying things, because I gave up. I didn't eat any sugar or anything like that, and my life just kind of flatlined, it felt like, for a while. But then there are things that, you know, you get back into. One thing I have noticed though is I'm more sensitive to some situations. Like, I absolutely hate flying now, and I used to really like flying, but I've noticed that I'm more sensitive to the kind of strangeness of flying.
Tell us more, because we discussed this, I know, recently. Tell us more about that, because I was quite intrigued by that.
I think you get a real sense of groundedness through meditation, and I've noticed that flying makes me feel really discombobulated in a way that it never did before. It just feels completely unnatural and wrong.
Yeah. I got that, strangely enough, it was getting in the way because I couldn't fly anywhere, and we wanted to fly to Canada, which is a long flight to Vancouver. And I was at a hypnosis group, literally, and as an encore, the lady that was taking it, a wonderful lady, she sort of said, let's do somebody. Who's got a problem? And I said, well, I'm going flying. I've got a 10-hour flight, and I really can't stand flying. I really hate it. And she said, well, come down. And she was talking to the class, and she was saying to me, sort of, okay, picture this. Picture it, right? Okay, now you've got this image of a plane, and I want you to take the color out of the picture, make it a black and white photograph. Now take it 20 yards away. Coming back to the class, she's saying, what I'm doing, I'm destructuring this image for him, and Alan is seeing this in a different way. She said, okay, now take it 200 yards away. And I'm sort of visualizing a black and white picture. It's getting further and further away, further and further away. She said, okay, come out of it now, it's gone. And she said, how do you feel about flying? It's gone. There was no problem. The problem had just disappeared. And I went back to my seat, and the fellow next to me, I said, did you make notes about that? And he said, yeah. I looked at it, and the notes were exactly what I'd heard her say, but it had just gone. No problem. And we flew to, Canada. There's something like 5 films, while you're going, and you're still not in, flying over Calgary yet. So it is really, it's quite a thing, but it had just gone, and it's never come back. In fact, I actively enjoy it now, particularly the takeoff. I just think it's such a.
I know that's the weird thing about it, is I like the landing, which is supposed to be like the dangerous bit of it. But it's the being up in the middle of the air that I hate the most. I just find it, like the thought of doing a long flight is just like, oh, I just don't fancy it at all.
It's that realization, isn't it, that you're in a kind of a pressurized steel tube, 27,000 feet, 30,000 feet up, and there's nowhere to go if something goes wrong. You can't just get off.
People that choose the films, surely they have to choose films that there's no plane crashes in. I have to make sure that there's none of those films in the entertainment.
Yeah, because for many years, many of you you won't be aware of this, but I was an executive for an airline, and I used to fly almost for a living, and I was always in the air. I was heading across Europe, solving problems here, there, and everywhere. And I used to just love it. And funnily enough, the way you have your moments in life where you feel you're in the perfect place. And that for me was an internal flight on the Iranian airline from Jersey to Guernsey. And I was just flying between the islands. And I remember sitting on the plane, looking out the window, and I was thinking, God, I love this job. The way you have a moment where you think, I really love it. And then I realized I had to go down and I had to do employee relations negotiations with the refuelers at Jersey Airport. Yeah. And it was back to hell again.
Have you ever seen that Werner Herzog film of that girl, the one girl that survived a plane crash over the Amazon rainforest? It's a true story.
Right.
And it was an oversubscribed flight. And the reason why Werner Herzog made the documentary about her was that he was at the airport waiting to get on that flight, and he was not allowed on. He was turned down. So he narrowly escaped being on that flight. And yeah, she landed so hard in her seat that her eye sockets, her eyes went all bloodshot, and then wandered around the Amazon rainforest. I think her parents worked on like a Amazon, like in a kind of research station somewhere. So she was sort of familiar with the terrain reasonably. And so she wandered, I think it was something like 9 days, and then came across a village, and they thought she was a demon because her eyes were all red still. But yeah, the sole survivor of a small plane crash.
Because that again reminds me of one of the, I don't know who again I was discussing it with, but the implications of that famous incident with the Uruguayan rugby team when they crashed in the Andes. And the way in which they had to end up eating each other, or
the alive?
Alive, yes. And some of the things that the mental states that they got into under those circumstances, the kind of real extremes of human endurance, almost. It's intriguing there, and of course, it all then reminds me of coming back full circle to the things we've been discussing. The Harding idea of what it's like to not have a head. And if you recall, we were discussing this previously, the idea of we never ever know we've got a head. Whenever we look down, we are a headless body. And it's that realization of what we really are. We're not our heads, we're not our eyes, we're not our fingers. We're something viewing the world via our senses. But what that something is, we don't know. And I guess when you go into deep meditative states, you look for that inside. And I'm told that there's nothing there. You go inwards, but there is no you. You realize that you are really your response to the outside world, and that is your narrative, and that's what defines you.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's nothing in there. Alan, is that how you'd see it?
Yes, it is. We used to do one or two Harding exercises when I was a yoga teacher. There's a wonderful one which he has where I used to ask everybody, we do a session and they'd lay down and have a deep relaxation, which we used to always do before meditation. And then instead of a meditation, sometimes you've got one of those sheets of dots, different colored dots, you've got 5 colors. And what I would do is go around the people. Usually I'd have around 30 or 40 in the group. And I'd put sort of 5 reds, 5 blues, 5 greens, 5 yellows, and 5 with no dots on. And I'd go around and just tap their forehead. So everybody thought they had a dot on their head. And then I'd say, okay, now I don't want you to speak to anybody. Please don't speak. But I want the yellows in this corner, the reds in that corner, the blues in that corner, and the whatever's in that corner. And you'd get chaos. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, like they'd start to organize that they could put other people into the right corner, but they couldn't do it themselves. So there's this big chaos going on. And then there's these people in the middle who haven't got a dot. And, they keep on going and standing in the corners, and the other people take them out and put them back in the middle. And you just watch these people. And they get really upset. They get to the point sometimes where they come over to you and they just say, stop the bloody game. What's going on? What's happening? And he's to do that point about, what he says, the developments that come from that is, you don't know how handsome or how ugly you are. You've no idea really whether you're big or short. Somebody has put you into that category and you've never really known. And you can keep taking yourself out of it and they'll keep putting you back in that category. No, you are fat. You have got a big nose. It's not something that instantly. It's only things which other people have told you. So most of your ego is being controlled by what other people have said about you. And you could have been with a really nasty bunch of so-and-sos. And you need to re-examine all those sort of things and put yourself into situations and see whether people take you out. That's the thing. Whether you should be. You don't even know whether you're intelligent or not. People have pushed you into these categories. And when we talk about that, it becomes a lot of fun. And we would often sort of carry on until about 11 o'clock, just discussing that, 7-8 minute exercise when some people went through real turmoil, because they couldn't find the right color. How could they possibly put themselves in the color? Yeah, and yet you've told them, get yourself in that. You don't mince your words. You say, get yourself in the color that you should be in. And it's fascinating. So he had some wonderful ideas for breaking the ego down, shambling it, and then building it up again and saying, look, you've been educated this way by all the other people you've ever come across. They've put you in categories. Keep taking yourself out of the categories. Keep exploring what your potential is. You're not a person. You don't look like everybody else. You're completely unique. Your consciousness is looking out from this body, and it's completely different. Very powerful stuff. Very powerful stuff, yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Right. Well, I'm aware that we're probably now 1 hour and 42 minutes in, which always, if in a time dilation effect, seeing as Sarah and I discussed this, that the time dilation effect takes place. And you go, good Lord.
I know, it's weird. The first time I look at the clock, it's nearly always we're 45 minutes in already. And I'm like, what?
What happened there? I know, absolutely. It's extraordinary. And I'm really pleased at how this is developing. I mean, the dynamic for these talks is really good. And I'm thinking at some stage in the future, it'd be really wonderful if we could invite a load of people for a kind of a live conference on here or a live discussion. We'd have to organize it in some way, but I'm sure it would be a really powerful exercise, I think. Right, okay, everybody. I'd like to thank Dr. Alan Roberts for being an absolutely fascinating guest. And just to say to Alan, I really miss our chats. It's nice being down in West Sussex, but I really miss just the way we talk. One of the things I would like to mention before we finish, though, because Alan and I were discussing this on earlier today, was one of the things that I'm thinking of doing at the moment is I've recently acquired a virtual reality headset. And what I'm thinking of doing is trying to create a virtual reality environment whereby we can all meet up in virtual reality in one way or another. I've got an Oculus Quest 2, and I know this is the Christmas present that everybody's trying to get hold of at the moment. But Alan and I were involved in a fascinating exercise a few years ago. Alan, do you want to explain it, and then I can join in later?
No, because I was carried along by this wave of enthusiasm. But it was Flanagan's apple, and I remember sitting in there. And the only thing about whether we can say it, so there were certain olfactory senses which were being stimulated in the real pub, which were not being stimulated in the virtual pub, which were where we were anyway, downstairs in the cellar. Yeah. was quite dingy. But the guys who literally had the it wasn't Second Life. What was it?
It was Second Life. What had happened was that in Second Life, when it first started, there was a virtual and what's the street where the cavern is?
Now, if you hadn't have asked me, I'd have told you.
I know, absolutely. It's just gone into my mind. But anyway, a group of software engineers or designers had designed a Second Life version of a street in Liverpool. Mm. And they'd also recreated all the pubs and shops and everything else. So it was really quite extraordinary. And myself and my little group, we decided that we would all go on to Second Life and we'd all meet on Second Life with our avatars and we'd wander around virtual Liverpool. And then it dawned upon me that we could actually go to one of the pubs that is in virtual reality called Flanagan's Apple, because it exists in reality as well. And the idea I had was, let's all truck over to Liverpool. Let's all have our laptops with us. Let's go into Flanagan's Apple in reality and log on to the Flanagan's Apple in virtual reality and discuss with other people in different parts of the country and different parts of the world the sensation, because it really got across the idea of exactly what reality is and how it overlaps in certain ways. And it was most strange. But what was frustrating, wasn't it, Alan? Do you remember we couldn't get the Wi-Fi to work underneath?
That's right.
So we couldn't quite do it. But I'm thinking if we could create in some way within VR chat or something, a facsimile of a place we know. And I'm thinking possibly, I don't know, the place that we used to meet in Croydon, you know, the coffee shop we used to meet in Croydon. We could recreate that, or create indeed the coffee shop at the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool that the It-Lad group in Liverpool used to meet. And then meet in the virtual reality environment with the virtual reality headsets on and see what happens, because I think that could be quite extraordinary. And because we've got people in the group, haven't we, Sarah, like Carl, who are absolute world-leading experts in this stuff. You know, we've got the guys that could really make it happen in an amazing way. We could create Plato's Cave, couldn't we?
I love the fact that you're going to create any new place in virtual reality and it's a cafe in Croydon. Being from Croydon, I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah, no, it's because why not Croydon? You know, it's a great place to do it. It's this kind of, again, this kind of liminal place between down here and London, isn't it? It kind of just on the edge. It's like a hypnagogic experience, isn't it? Croydon is a hypnagogic experience, you know, which is really good. But we could try and do that, and it could be a very exciting thing to do. Or indeed, even better, let's see if we can recreate Plato's Cave in VR and then visit it in VR and then recreate the illusion of Plato's Cave within an illusion within an illusion. You know, it's really great. You know,
you're getting carried away now, aren't you? You need to do meditation.
I'm actually, funnily enough, I'm actually watching myself on Facebook at the moment on my phone, and I'd never realised how much hand gestures I use. I think I've got Italian blood in me somewhere, I think.
You've got politics next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Who knows? You know, we could do that. Okay, right. The next guest will be on Monday the 21st, and it's my good friend Martin Huxter. Just a little bit of background of Martin for everybody is that Martin was my master of ceremonies when I spoke at a big event in New York. Literally, I think it's just over 10 years ago, when our good friend Susan Marie Kowalinsky actually hired the ballroom at a big hotel in New York and paid for meals for 300 people to turn up to hear me talk. And Martin was the guy that was the warm-up guy beforehand. And in fact, the place I spoke was the place where the movie Wall Street, where he made the Greed is Good speech. I was actually on that stage realizing, and this was again a kind of a double take, you know, and thinking, my God, how my life has changed from working class kid in Bromborough to being in New York making this speech. So it was quite a strange feeling. But Martin is a great film expert and we're going to be looking into the Atlantean aspects of various movies. And we're just going to have a really long chat about movies and everything else. So that's going to be really good. Alan, Sarah, what can I say? Yeah, another great show. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful. This is really building up into something extremely special. And without Sarah, I couldn't do it. And without the guests, I couldn't do it. So thank you very much. Any final points that the two of you want to make before we wend our weary way into the evening?
Nice to virtually meet you, Alan.
Nice to meet you, Sarah. And to meet him again.
Him.
On Zoom.
Absolutely. Why not? Okay, everybody. Thanks again for listening in. It's been really, really great. And let's look forward to next week's show as well. But Alan, thank you very much. And again, Alan, thank you for being such a great friend. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're a good friend yourself, Tony. Thanks very much. God bless.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.